Hello, everyone. Welcome to our annual forecast this year for 2024. As you can see, the screen says January 3rd, but this is January 10th. Thank you all for allowing me to reschedule. I came down with a cold, and I was trying to think to the last time I had one, and I think it's probably been about 10 years since I've had a cold. It was not COVID. Leroy and I got COVID way back in 2020. So we're familiar with what that's like. It was just your good old little cold and perhaps just a little too much holiday fun for us this season. So here we are, though, 1 week later. My annual forecast, I will try and keep this under 2 hours, but I got a lot to go over, and so this happens to be a webinar that runs overtime sometimes. But remember that you will always have the PDFs of all the PowerPoint slides for you to look at throughout the year. And so let me get us going. First of all, we have two housekeeping slides. I always put this one on. These are the hyperlinks to different areas of our website on our YouTube channel if you want to look for more information. The second one is the fact that this fall, I was invited to do a private workshop for the Manitoba Astrologers Association up in Canada. And so I presented this topic to them, which they were very excited. And so we ended up having a 6-hour workshop together. And I now have it available for public consumption. As you can see on your screen, over a 4-year time period, 4 outer planets, and if we include Chiron in this, it's a dwarf planet if you want, they all change signs in a very short time period. And their cycles range anywhere from 7 to 20 years. So those are major, major shifts on a collective level. So if you are interested in these ingresses for these 4 planets, they're all together as a nice little workshop for you, and you can click on that blue hyperlink when you get the PDFs, and it'll take you right to the page if you are interested in that. It was a workshop I wanted to do for a while, and then it just presented itself with the Manitoba Astrologers Association, so I'm grateful to them for allowing me to do it. Some of the chart examples are for Canada, so if you happen to be a Canadian listening to my forecast, you will like seeing your own country's charts for once in a webinar series. And so the numerology for 2024 is an 8-year, and it's basically sometimes a struggle to manifest all the efforts that we have made in this current 9-year cycle, which started way back in 2017, if you can remember that. Remember the Women's March with our pink pussy hats? That was the beginning of a 1-year cycle way back when. 8 years about the fruits of our labors over the last 7 years. And the fruits of our labors can manifest both positive and negative, depending on what efforts we have made. 8 years are sometimes known as power struggles. It's an even number, and you can just see the symbology on your screen. It kind of splits everything in half. And so, do we want this or do we want that? Do we want this or do we want that? Some of our keywords: action, assertiveness, productivity, power, including power struggles and power plays. Balance, money and resources, including abundance or losses. We can get into overwork and overwhelm with all that effort to manifest and put energy into everything. So it's important that we learn to focus our energy and have a bit of self-control and self-authority. And of course, you're probably very familiar with the fact that the number 8 is a vertical infinity symbol. So here we are balancing what's physical and metaphysical, balancing what we want to manifest and then having a balance with what is unmanifested or non-physical, and being able to derive as much pleasure from our inner world as we do in that outer world that we so want to manifest throughout this year. Now, the Mercury retrogrades, I always look at those by element. Last year, 23, Mercury was in the earth element for 6.5 months of the year. In 24, it is now going to move into the fire element for 6 months, including the retrograde cycles that you can see on your screen. And so whereas last year, 23, that earth year, we kind of had some of those opinions that nobody was happy with the economy, even though all the markers were good. Everybody was still a little, feeling the pinch in their pocketbooks through inflation and gas, and etc. That was part of all of that earth energy. Now there's a shift into fire, and this is going to breathe that excitement into the air, including all the communications. We will definitely have communication stirred up quite a bit through this year when Mercury is in the fire signs. And I've got little dates on the screen for you that you can look at as time goes by here. Jumping right into the ingress chart for midnight on January 1st. For those of you who are new to my forecast, I always like to use 0° Aries as the ascendant, because that way the chart is relevant to all of us, no matter where in the world we may reside. We can all look at the aspects that are presented on the screen here in the same perspective. And yes, your local charts will work for you, but we are looking at this from more of a broader perspective right now. We started off the year January 1st with Mercury stationary direct, with a conjunction to Mars, a square to Neptune. We had another earthquake in Japan. We had a plane mishap just recently where door blew off of a what is it, a 737, and so they're all grounded. We can see some of the excitement that might come from that. Recognize that an ingress chart will be a flavor or an energy that will carry throughout the year. Mercury direct with Mars and Sag, we can see feisty communication starting out, confusing or misleading communications. We also will find as we go through this year in the United States that legal issues and lawsuits, especially surrounding Donald Trump, will kind of tend to dominate us throughout most of the year. Now, we do have a grand trine in the earth signs with Jupiter, Sun, and Moon here. And so this will bring in more of our resources energy throughout the year. And we look at trines in EA as rewards or paybacks depending upon prior efforts. Trines are always what's going to manifest based upon what we did prior to that, up to that whole trine aspect. So some may see resource rewards, some may see resource expenses. It'll be unique to all of us. I suspect also that this grand trine is going to be there throughout the year again, as we have to deal with all of these earth events and climate change. 2023 was the hottest year on record since we've been keeping track. We're going back long time periods when we use archaeology and our different sciences. Stay tuned. We'll see what 2024 is going to bring us with Mercury in fire signs for half of the year. It is in general going to be a time period for us to review what we value in our material world. And of course, as we look going forward at Jupiter making its conjunction to Uranus before moving into Gemini, having that prioritization and simplification of our material world This can easily carry on throughout 2024 when you look at this grand trine and, Uranus still being in Taurus itself. The other planetary configuration that has a tendency to really catch our eye here is the fact that Moon in Virgo is in an opposition to Uranus and Pisces, and they are making a mutable T-square to Venus in Sagittarius. This too will lend itself to the whole issue of our value systems, which are ruled by Venus and its rulership via Taurus Libra. And so we can see conflicting value systems over gender issues, Moon, Saturn, the anima, animus. We can see the, power struggles over gender issues like the abortion issue, like the LGBTQ, etc. All of that can be carried through this year as well, not only just because it's an election year, but because this T-square is showing up, asking us, what do we value? And you have to have your head in the sand in the United States to know that we really have a lot of split and divide in this country, and it'll feel like a repeating groove on the record as we go through the next 2 hours with PowerPoint slides. Finally, I just want to point out, last year, 23, we had 3 months of all the planets direct, no retrogrades. This year, we've got about a 2-month time period, February, March, as we move forward. As I prepared the slides over the course of the last week or so, I really it was like, oh gosh, the first half of the year is pretty busy with a fair amount of astrological events going on. The second half of the year, while it seems like maybe astrological events will calm down, the fact for us in the United States, if you live here, it's a presidential year, and we have the longest election cycles on the planet. They never end. And so that'll make up for the second half of the year for us in the United States going, oh, I guess we are going to be busy this year. About 2-3 years ago, I switched the USA chart that I use. I have moved to a chart from Michael Munkasi's research. It is, yes, based upon July 4th, 1776, but it goes with a Virgo rising. Here is a blue hyperlink that is a synopsis of Michael's research, an article he wrote for NCGR a few years ago. And basically it was the fact that in 1989, the Library of Congress discovered old letters from Benjamin Franklin and others in which the letters quoted the signing of the Declaration of Independence between 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So this is Michael Munkasi's chart. This is what I will use here for the next couple of hours. Perhaps the biggest thing to point out, if you're not familiar with this for July 4th, is that the US has always had what we call these inclusive, exclusive trends. Give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, and build a wall, as I say. This is brought about by the Mercury-Pluto oppositions. You can include the Chiron T-square, especially this year, by the Sun square to Saturn, and by Mars square to Neptune. And these are activated throughout the year. Each set of these 3 aspects are activated this year. Now, what I have included for you is a list of some of the major transits for the United States chart. We're not going to go over these in detail for time considerations, but I did want to give you this list, and perhaps the one that you want to look at here is the fact that this year the USA is going to have their Chiron return, and the first one is April 21st, and then we'll have the second and third Chiron returns for the USA later this year, early 2025. More on Chiron as we go by, but there's just a couple of the hits for you. And these, again, are only transits. I did not list any of the solar arcs or progression right now. The ingress chart from the Munchausen perspective, remember, well, first of all, let me just say, January 1st is always going to find the sun opposing the natal USA sun. January 1st, July 4th, they oppose each other. However, we also will many times find the inner planets as they transit through Sag, Capricorn, sometimes Aquarius. They oppose these Gemini, Cancer, Leo planets and nodal axis. That is just a given in almost every ingress chart for the United States. What I wanted to say, though, is remember we talked about that Moon Saturn T-square with Venus? Well, it activates the natal US Uranus and Gemini, and by transits will create a grand cross in those mutable signs. That too is going to kind of emphasize the gender issues that I just mentioned, the whole issue of abortion not going away. By the way, if you didn't know this, I live in the Northern Plains in western South Dakota in the mountains, and South Dakota was the first state in the Union to put the initiative and referendum process into our state constitution. I want to say we did it back in 1898 or the 1890s or something. Half of the country has followed through with initiative and referendum processes. And we have the abortion issue on the ballot here in our conservative red state in South Dakota. And there's a little debate about the writing of it, but I was happy to see it on the ballot. I don't know if there's a red state that will decline supporting the right of females to be autonomous. There's one of those words, Leroy, am I using it correctly? They have the autonomy right to their bodies. So I think that's how I want to say it. I was wondering how to spell it earlier.
All the girls think it should be very autonomous, yes.
Yes, thank you. But we will also see that Uranus and Gemini, it's going to also tell us about that split between, for lack of better terms, liberal and conservative parties in the United States, and how we have such diametrically posed beliefs about what it is to be masculine and feminine and what we value all around that. And so it will also put itself into this whole information game that we seem to be playing with social media and going to conservative and liberal news sources. So we are all in our boxes hearing what we want to hear. All of that stuff will also be part of the picture as well. I'm not going to belabor the fact that we have Pluto, January 1st, just past the Pluto return. We're still going to be working with this throughout the rest of the decade, only now we have Pluto new phase. Stay tuned for Pluto going into Aquarius. We also have Neptune, stationary direct, about a month, and opposing itself within an orb and making the squares to Uranus within orb. Remember that Mercury-Mars, Mercury stationary direct, square Neptune, that also creates a grand cross. Also in the mutable archetypes in the USA chart. And so the question is, because of the mutable archetype, will we start to see some shift in our political divides, or will the oppositions and squares keep it entrenched? Stay tuned. Time will tell as we continue with Saturn, balsamic Neptune in the skies, and we really look at what do we believe in this country. Thank you, international listeners, for allowing me to have a USA filter as we go through this forecasting. I did put through just a few highlights for you every so many slides when I thought there was something that might be sticking out in the heavens, or where we're looking at planets changing directions. January, Sun's going to make its last conjunction to Pluto at literally the last minute, 29:59, and that same day, then they both go into Aquarius. This is the last conjunction in Capricorn for 240 years. This is the 16th time they've met in Capricorn. And so it really, that astrologers call that last degree of a sign an anaretic degree, that dissolving, shedding, resolving. We're not just the last degree, we are the last minute. And so how will we see a lot of these last 15 years of Capricorn autocracy kind of coming to a head, and recognizing that it's not really going to work as we're moving forward. And so I think that this time period here in January, also with Uranus going stationary direct, is really going to show us this turnover between our Capricorn past, Aquarian future. And in general, Pluto moving into Aquarius doesn't guarantee rebellion and fairness and equality. It can continue on with all of the social class chasms, and it can take a while for Pluto's transit through Aquarius to really bring about some of the more egalitarian changes that probably many of us on this webinar are intending and hoping to see. And so there'll be glimpses of it, but I just don't know how much Pluto's 8.5 months in Aquarius this year will really bring for us in breaking free. We're going to have to wait and see. If anything, we should see some of it in February, because as you can see on your screen, we have Mercury, Mars, and Venus. Mars is traveling with the inner planets at this time of the year. They're all going to go into Aquarius, and they're all going to make their conjunctions to Pluto before it even hits the first degree. So it might be this month of February we start to notice things in the news. We start to see all the AI stuff in the news that's gonna overwhelm us this year as we go forward with everything. But here's our little mini messengers that might give us glimpses of what Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring for us. And so in saving time, I kind of did bi-wheels on a lot of the slides. And in your lower left, here's when Pluto goes into Aquarius the second time, as we said, on January 20th, your chart for 0 degrees. And then in your upper right, here is the bi-wheel with the USA chart and the Pluto ingress around it. And so here again, we are going to be very close to Uranus going stationary direct. So as it comes through the end of January, let's see what else the world wants to bring forth for us, perhaps in regards to Earth events or resource issues. Mars has moved into a square to the nodes of the moon as we look at the Pluto Aquarius chart. And so this is kind of, where do we want to put our energy? It's still close enough to Mercury. Mercury's catching up with it. Mercury makes 3 conjunctions to Mars. Let's see, they were Scorpio, Sag retrograde, and now Capricorn here in a little bit from this chart. And so Mars starts the year off squaring the nodes of the moon from Capricorn, and Mars is going to end the year in Cancer, squaring the nodes of the moon. So we're going to have at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And so it really asks us, where do we want to put our actions? Where do we want to focus our whole desire energy? And of course, as we go through this nodal axis transit all through 24 in Aries Libra, there's this balance between ourself and others. Where do I have to hold my hand out and include? And where do I have to have the autonomy of myself? How am I reviewing all of my relationships? And where there is inequality, how do I stand up? How do I be independent? And so we're going to be balancing all this through this Pluto ingress into Aquarius and even beyond. Now, we have a moon square to Saturn in this ingress chart that is taking place here. It gets active over here in the USA chart, as you can see, with Uranus. All right. And so as we see here, I think that these public opinions and beliefs are still going to be split in two. If you look at the second Pluto ingress to Aquarius and its conjunction with the sun, and you look at the fact that it is within, 6-7 degrees balsamic, the USA South Node, you can just see we're going to have several more years of this discussion around public opinion. In mundane charts, the moon rules the public, and it rules, public identity, public opinions, how we come together emotionally as a collective. That south node of the moon is telling us where we come from. And again, you can see here where we want the egalitarianism, equal rights for all, but you can see the distortions of Aquarius that have the classes and the elitism and the haves and have-nots. Well, Pluto, new phase, is balsamic. New phase itself is balsamic the south node. So here we are throughout all of the 2020s with this huge soul identity crises that's going on. Now, as the rest of the decade comes through, we may see shifts in public opinion. Who knows what events may come up that will start to say, wait a minute, I can't deal with this anymore. I do not want a Donald Trump dictatorship. And so, as we've seen in some of the media, basically half of our country in the USA, especially from a political perspective, each half thinks the other half is taking the country in the wrong directions. Liberal thinks that of conservatives, conservatives think that of liberals. Well, I'm sure probably most of you here recognize that in inclusive principles of giving, sharing, and including, that tends to be more of a broad liberal persuasion, and we have no choice in this country but to start to recognize those who are different than us. But it's going to take us a while to get there. And so are we going to relapse into another round of imperialism? Or is Pluto in Aquarius going to start bringing us some of that fairness and justice for all? I'm going to one more time caution you. You might want to have a little bit of a longer perspective of Pluto moving into Aquarius. It's going to be 2 decades, and we can start to maybe pass judgment when we're halfway through and say, oh, we're making progress, or we're not making progress. Time will tell. It doesn't mean that we don't become socially active right now at this moment, but we're talking major cycles here with the Pluto transit and its effect on the USA chart as well. Now, just to show you this, I have used this before and it popped into my head, and I thought I'm gonna just remind us of this. By the time Pluto finishes its transit in 2024 and moves into Pluto and Pisces in 2025, that's the line of demarcation where the USA as white Northern Europeans will become the minority in the country, and all of our other races combined will now then start taking over the majority throughout the rest of the century. this really, really, really scares our rural white males, if I may say that. Forgive me, no judgments against genders, please. But I just thought I'd remind you of this one and also remind you that our Aquarian age intent is unity and diversity. I have a couple more Pluto and Aquarius slides. I'm just going to go through these pretty fast. Here's the dates, in and out, in and out. As you can see here, 8.5 months in Aquarius. We dip back 3.5 into Capricorn in that September, October, November time period. Couple of very brief things that I've been saying. I probably said these before. Let me just say what's new. The Aquarius archetype in evolutionary astrology contains 3 segues or segments of the population. Those who defend the past, and that's known as Saturn, the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And then there are those who are always wanting to charge forward into the future, the progressives, the avant-gardes, represented by Uranus, the new ruler of Aquarius. And then there are all those who sway back and forth in the middle. You know, politically, it's these independents. Am I going to go Republican or Democrat in this presidential election cycle? And so Pluto in Aquarius is going to trend back and forth with Z3 choices throughout the next 20 years. And sometimes we're going to have those cataclysmic events that really shake us forward, shake us up, hopefully to go forward in the midst of just continuing to evolve over the next 20 years. Now, one of the basic things that's going to happen globally with this transit, autocratic versus democratic societies are going to go back and forth for supremacy. And our autocratic countries don't really play by the rule books. They like to destroy the rules to get whatever they want. I think I have hope through Pluto and Aquarius that we'll start to see democracy come forth again, if not immediately 24, 25, we will see it have its wave coming through as time goes by. You don't need me to tell you about the AI. I have a slide on that that's going to come up for you in just a moment. But also, I just wanted to remind us, the archetype of Aquarius is trauma, both current and past lives. And trauma is an intense disturbance caused by a shocking event or stress on all 4 levels, and it has a lasting effect. It dictates our behavior on subconscious levels. So we've got to make persistent efforts to change the effects of trauma in our world. And so I've said this before in various ways. I really think that Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring us a new age renaissance. And that's those, you know, that Uranian rulership of Aquarius that says, well, how are we going to change things? How are we going to move things forward? I think in Pluto's long transit, we will continue to see both more physical disease contagions and psychological contagions. That's the biggie that we are going to really have to move forward and evolve throughout Pluto's long transit. And I can really feel like we're finally to Pluto and Aquarius in 2024. Now, I've put this in quite a few times, but I think that we just need to have a little reminder because we hear this word AI, artificial intelligence, again, and it is just going to explode through this year and the rest of the decade. And so, in case you're not aware of this, here's the difference. Conventional computing is our calculators, binary, store and compute 1 or 0 with transistor switches. We make these integrated circuit transistors and we've got them as small as they can get. Think your cell phone. And so now we have been moving into what's called quantum computing. This is where we store values, 1, 0, both, anything in between at the same time. And quantum mechanics is allowing our computers to work parallel instead of serial. That's why they can compute so fast, so much faster than the human brain can. And when you want to get to quantum physics, coming from our metaphysical world, sometimes we know that light can be the particle and the wave at the same time. One's moving, one's non-moving. That's what quantum mechanics and quantum computing is. And so here is the Aquarian age coming. Nobody has the date. But Pluto in Aquarius is definitely going to bring us in for us. Now, I like to bring this out too. I'm a fan of Dan Brown. I would tell you, if you haven't read his book Origin, or if you have, revisit it. It really explores creationism versus science, and it really works with the AI technology throughout all the book, and it can help you kind of in a grounding of what we're going to be experiencing this year as Pluto goes into Aquarius, Jupiter goes into Gemini, etc., etc. Um, we don't have any choice. Um, I don't care, what your age is. My 85-year-old mother does not have to learn how to use a computer, although she's actually doing it a little bit with her smartphone. But some of us who still use our computers, we still use all our smart devices, we're going to be brought along with this AI world. You don't put your head in the sand. Do your best to understand it, especially this year. It's just, yeah, it'll explode. Some more highlights for you. We'll have a Mercury retrograde this spring. You can see on your screen the 2 months that it is going to be in the sign of Aries. I started to list all of the Jupiter and Saturn aspects for you date-wise, and I've also put them together for you a different way. And I kind of have, again, all of the planetary changes in directions for you highlighted in red. And so again, you'll have these to refer to if you want some quick little cheat sheets as you're going through everything. Chiron transiting is going to conjunct the USA's natal Chiron 3 times. We're having a Chiron return this year. April 21st, November 7th, February 18th, as I showed you before. Before that, though, the transiting North Node in Aries is going to conjunct the USA Chiron, January 11th. That's tomorrow. And then February 20th, remember February, all the inner planets in Aquarius, the transiting North Node is going to conjunct transiting Chiron at about 17 degrees Aries, a few degrees shy of the USA Chiron return. And so, will we renew a healing process as a collective? Or we go into the distortions and become entrenched in that Aries us versus them energy. Will we expand our fighting? Will we expand gun violence of some sort? Will there be an event with gun violence this year that turns the tide? Aries, enough people saying this is ridiculous. I am going to vote for local and state and federal people who advocate for gun control. This can be something of what might come up with Chiron's return. The USA has been declining in life expectancy before COVID. It's because we are the only first world advanced country that does not have universal health care. We're kind of inching towards it. But because of that, we have horrible, mortality with expectant mothers and babies. We have declining life expectancies that, again, exasperated with COVID. And so, will our Chiron returns, continue merging traditional and alternative healing modalities. Since 2019, with my father and my mother, now with just my mother, take her to every doctor's appointment. And I am really watching that blending of traditional and alternative healing modalities starting to come up and come together. I started going to my mom's primary doctor. We moved my parents here in 2019. And I started going to her because she is open to me on no medications. And I have been into herbology for 40 years, and it's my thing, along with various vitamin supplements. And so she's open to both my mother and I doing those things first before we go to a prescription. I think this is going to expand. And Pluto and Aquarius is going to bring such technological leaps in the medical field. Leroy went and had back surgery. It was a minor back surgery. It's 2 months. He came through just fine. Amazed at the nurses saying, well, that is an inorganic form of vitamin C. You really want to take this form of vitamin C that's more organic. Other little details. And so I don't know how everybody else across the country is, but I think that this Chiron return, this is going to be one of the major areas, how we self-heal, that we can see renewed energy in that area. Of course, what we still have a distortion with is those who can afford health care, those who cannot, and all of our conservative states that are declining, free food for poor children in the summers, that are refusing to expand Medicaid for those who cannot afford it, etc. We won't preach to the choir, but I think this is some of the major themes we'll see with these Chiron returns for the USA. Stay tuned. There may be more things that we can observe with these transits as well. Here are the eclipses. We start out with North Node eclipse season in the spring. We have a lunar eclipse that takes place first. The lunar eclipse will be visible on the North American continent for most of us that live there. What we will see here is the nodal axis is going to be on the USA Saturn. It's going to square Sun. And we're going to have the lunar eclipse with the sun, moon, 5 degrees, Aries, Libra, squaring Venus, squaring Jupiter, even in orbs of bringing in the sun. And so here we go again, include versus exclude. What are going to be extremes? I expect that the whole immigration and race issue can be one issue, can be two issues. I think those are going to just get exacerbated here throughout our presidential election year. We already see Donald Trump doing it. It's not going to go away. It's just going to continue to be in the news and appeal to our fears rather than our inclusions. Not so much for the younger generations, but it's definitely going to be there for our older citizens. And so stay tuned as we watch that. Could we get a Supreme Court ruling on the abortion pill? They did take it up in a various way, trying to prevent the abortion pill from being sent through the mail. Will we see something as soon as these eclipses? Stay tuned. I do think that because the moon's going to be in Libra on the south node and it's got all this Aries energy opposing it, there can be outbursts, there can be frustrations, there can be violence, there can be war, there can be the things that have a tendency to come up on a mundane level. Personally, these lunar eclipses are about showing us how to go forward through relationships. How do we reach greater levels of fairness and equality? and not lose our sense of individualization. North node eclipses, again, they're going forward. Now, when we get to the North Node solar eclipse, which, by the way, if you live in the eastern part of the US, you get to see the solar eclipse. Make your plans, go visit it. I saw the 2017 one, and I've only seen it once. I absolutely loved it. So happens on the North Node solar eclipse, Chiron is in an exact conjunction to the solar eclipse. And so, first of all, look at this. Using a wide orb, with the exception of Pluto, from Mars to Uranus, we have a sextile. Everything is bundled energy within there. Pisces, Aries, Taurus, in a yod with the south node. And so when solar eclipses follow lunar eclipses, it's like the lunar exposes everything and the solar is the opportunity to move forward. And it's on the north node of the moon. And so there's an intensity to create, to do, to leap forward this spring. Make the most of it, regardless of what could be going on a collective or mundane level. Here in the US, because this is going to be so close to the first Chiron return, April 21st, here again, potentials to heal, but we can also want to strike out in the US and be imperialistic. We can have distortions of everyone feeling wounded. We could have some financial upsets because of where this is taking place in the Munkaci chart in the 8th house. Well, we see more of the banking issues in the news. I didn't put too much on that in this forecast. I emphasized other things, but YouTube channel, if you aren't familiar with me and my public banking mantra, you can go to Evolutionary Astronet and you can research my free webinar on the public banking movement, something like that. I'm still a big fan of it. Jupiter, Uranus have their conjunction one time, April 20th. There's a 14-year cycle of expanding an intuitive sense of ourself and also an expanding awareness of the universe and our participation in it. Now they have one conjunction taking place at about 22 degrees Taurus. We still see the conglomerate or stellium of planets here in Aries with the North Node. The Taurus conjunction, I think together as these two initiate a new 14-year cycle, I think that Earth events and climate change will dominate. Taurus is the physical Earth. I've said this multiple times. The USA has 4.5% of the population. We consume 25% of the resources. The rest of the world can't live like us. And so there has to be major reviews of values and resources. What also gets included in that, 29% of US citizens live in coastal regions. 40% of the world citizens, that 8 billion we have on the planet right now, 40% of that 8 billion live in coastal areas. And as we start to see the extremes of the Earth events, and we see the flooding happening again, as we see sea levels rise, perhaps you've seen some various maps of that, we're not all going to be able to live in coastal areas like we are today. And it can cause massive, shifts on the planet with where we physically reside. And so this can be one of the major intents with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and again, a 14-year cycle with a Taurus flavor. That we will, by the time they have their, next conjunction 14 years from now, we will have seen massive relocation of how we live in the world just because of rising sea levels. The Earth itself is losing space. In the USA chart, I look at this conjunction, okay, and the fact that we could have financial news because it's in Taurus, but we could also have some legal news that could go on here in the ninth house of the Munchausen chart. The question is, will we do the ninth house Pollyanna and, ignore climate change? Or will we start to take a broader and broader picture in our communities, in our states, and go, oh, wait a minute, we have to confront some things and make some gigantic leaps and initiations of how we are going to move forward. And by the way, for any of you who live in the East and the Southeast along all of the weather that you've been experiencing, I hope that you are all safe and surviving your storms okay. We've had a pretty mild winter here for us in western South Dakota, although starting tonight and heading into the next week, we're going to have one of those Canadian polar vortexes dip down and really hit us. We are looking at minus digits as our highs over the weekend without taking our wind chills into effect. And so it's been starting to be an annual thing for us up here in the northern plains. And my prayers go out to the animals all throughout this type of weather. Oh, my heart goes out to the animals and the four-leggeds as much as two-leggeds in my world. Right after, a month after, we have that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Jupiter ingresses into Gemini. And this is another one of those planetary ingresses that's really going to speed up the planet. Look at this chart right here, how we have Jupiter, Venus, Sun, stellium in Gemini, making a trine to Pluto retrograde at 2 degrees Aquarius. I'm looking at this going, we are just going to be so bombarded with information. You think you have spam or political texting on your phone? I have no idea how anybody gets my phone number. Confessions here. I use my old landline phone number, which I haven't had in 10 years, as the phone number I give out whenever I'm required to put the phone number in that space buying something online or wherever. I don't give out my phone number. I have no idea how they get it. And yet, this is what we could see with Jupiter going into Gemini, massive increases in misinformation, especially in our news cycles. We're split in how we get our news. All the AI info, are you starting to see partially generated by AI? I start to read an article and I go, oh, this is not good grammar. And so now if I see partially generated by AI, I don't even read it. I don't look at it. And pretty soon, everything's going to be that way almost. Now, Jupiter's going to be in the opposite sign, Gemini, of its rulership, Sag. And so this is when we're going to see laws, lawsuits, legal decisions. Something's going to start hitting the fan, so to speak, with all the lawsuits that Donald Trump has been bringing about left and right. It doesn't matter what it is. He appeals it this way, appeals it that way. Attorneys general in various states going back and forth and back and forth. We are going to be bombarded with legal issues and lawsuits. More on the Supreme Court in just a moment. When Jupiter transits through Gemini, it brings about what EA calls brain switching. Our left brain is the logical part of ourself, and our right brain is our intuition. Jupiter and Gemini has us going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and we get internally confused. And so whenever that happens, it's going to be very important to get out in nature or to breathe or to go to the gym and exercise. It's going to be very important to have some type of movement so that the brain can calm itself down and allow that intuitive side of Jupiter to reveal what is truth or fact for us. Very important throughout Jupiter's transit in Gemini. This transit will make it appear as though life itself is speeding up. That happens when planets move through Aquarius, especially slower moving planets, because Aquarius is an air sign. Gemini is an air sign. Pluto's transit, Jupiter's transit, it's just going to make us feel like busy, 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 busy. Everything's happening. How do I keep track of it all? How do I keep track of this electronica world? How do I keep track of the communications in my life? And so it's going to be very important again that we have physical movement to the abilities that we can do so to calm ourselves down and to help us ground and to help us make sense of everything. And so if nothing else, do breath work. I just came across, I've been aware of Dr. Andrew Weil, W-E-I-L, out of Arizona for a long, 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 long time. I just came across a breathing exercise for his that has been scientifically tested for helping you go to sleep. And it is, and you do a count, and you count the same all the way through, but through your nose, mouth closed, 4 breaths in, hold for 7, or no, 4, breathe in 4 counts, hold 7 counts, breathe out 8 counts. I've been practicing that. I have modified it to 4 counts breath in, 6 counts breath hold, 8 counts breath release. And I think I'm up to about a half a dozen times doing it. And then all of a sudden I got to breathe through my mouth and I'm hyperventilating and but I have noticed how it affects the brain. So little Jupiter and Gemini tidbit for you. Research Dr. Annual Wheel's breathing technique if you want more on that. Now, as Jupiter goes into Gemini, we still have this Aries stellium taking place, and Mars is involved in it as well. So, boy, these planets in Aries can all the way through, and especially when Mars ruling Aries joins them, lend itself to different sorts of violence. What we really want to work with, again, is attempting to balance between ourselves and others just as best as we can. Now, here's a list of the Jupiter aspects, and the reason I included 23 is Jupiter is going into retrograde cycles, 4-month retrograde cycles that cross over the calendar years. And so it doesn't finish up its waxing semi-squares to Neptune until the spring of this year from the 23 cycle. Jupiter usually makes one or more single aspects And then we have its 2024 retrogrades. Pay attention to this one with Pluto, because here's Jupiter's retrograde cycle 24-25, waxing sextiles Chiron, sesquisquadrates or sesquisquares, as astrologers are starting to say, to Pluto, in addition to the squares to Saturn. I will do a Jupiter and Gemini webinar May 20th, going into more detail with all of this. This is kind of just an overview for you. And again, more single aspects that we'll have going on later on. Jupiter square Saturn, that's one of the major noticeable aspects. So that's been getting a little talk from astrologers. This is the crises in action from their 2020 conjunction in Aquarius. And so Gemini, Pisces, and even into Cancer, Aries. Societal confusion over AI, misinformation. Are we going to start regulating things here in the US yet? We're way behind the European Union and some other countries in doing that type of thing. And I also think it's going to create our societal crises with immigration and racism and refugees. Jupiter's rulership of Sag is the whole migration archetype. And so Jupiter Sag, climate change, war, a presidential election, all of that stuff can just create more and more social changes. One of the things that Jupiter, Saturn are really having to recognize is that there's no going back geographically. We are a global village. Climate change is going to make sure we don't forget it. And as we've said before, these mass migrations are not going to go away. They're going to intensify more and more and more as this decade goes by. Just wait till Uranus goes into Gemini in 2025 and then makes its waxing trines to Pluto 26 through 28. And so we can try to exclude, but we as collectives are going to have to find ways in which we are going to become the global village. Just like social media, our electronic world, autocratic countries try to block Twitter, they try to block various social medias, and there are now satellites out there that can beam this information into those autocratic countries, and people are still getting informed in live time. That's not going to go away. That is going to continue to rise up, and the masses are going to continue to inform themselves. And so this social evolution, Pluto and Aquarius, is going to continue. And so Jupiter square Saturn is kind of like the growing pains over it. And then Jupiter's sextiles to Chiron, waxing sextiles, they're going to kind of be, oh, look at it this way, look at it that way. Again, Chiron in Aries with Jupiter, you're going to start to hear about these. Oh, I can't even remember the names of there's more than one of these applications, and they're, again, being run by satellites that aren't controlled by countries, that are beaming information to autocratic countries, and the masses are getting the information that the leaders are trying to suppress. Not going to happen, Pluto and Aquarius. So these Jupiter sextiles with Chiron can initiate that type of information, Gemini coming out there. It can also have its say, its choice points, as we look at the Chironic, self-healing, individually and collectively. Who's going to choose to move forward? Who's going to choose to, separate or decline healthcare for their collective groups. And so these Jupiter sextiles, as you see them, are all going to be within orb of the United States natal Chiron at 2021 Aries. And so here again, opportunities to shift things. Will we see, the freedom of women to choose what they want to do with their bodies on our ballot issues, as that comes through in different ways, various ways. We're going to choose more stuff. You cannot take half the population and suppress them. Although it's been done for a while, it's kind of on its way out as we initiate into the Aquarian age. Yes, we can still have fear, driving negativity, those choice points. Well, I can't reach out to those. I can't, I'm afraid of my neighbor kind of stuff. That can go on. Stay tuned. We'll see what happens. But we also have Jupiter making waxing sesqui quadrates. Oops, I got the, no, I have it right. I have it right. Aspects to Pluto. This is, and again, the young astrologers are starting to call these sesqui squares. I've called them sesqui quadrates forever, so I'm switching my word now. You can see where the original conjunctions were. But these, again, are the 135-degree gibbous phase. And so Jupiter, Gemini, Pluto, Aquarius, we think air signs trines. No, there's only one Jupiter, Pluto trine. And then it's going to have 3 of these sesqui squares asking for self-reflection and adjustment. Now, it can also bring up a fear of losing control that can have a spread of lies, confusing messaging. We can act impulsively. We can deliberately try to misinform people. We'll see democracy versus autocracy themes just running wild between these two signs. But, here's what can happen with our, sesqui squares. By sign, we think they should be harmonious. By aspect, they're not. It's leading up to the waxing inconjunct of 150 degrees. And when we move into the 225-degree sesqui square, that's coming after the 210 outer inconjunct, outer adjustments. And so if you are any type of a budding astrologer, I so encourage you to pay attention to semi-squares and sesqui quadrates. They're not in our astrology calendars anymore, but these Jupiter-Pluto aspects are just as strong as the Jupiter-Saturn squares, maybe even stronger with Pluto and or their signs. And so pay attention to these in your world as time goes by. And what we really want with these aspects is to deeply listen. Can we take into consideration what someone else is saying, even if it's different than our beliefs and different than our opinions? Yes, we may have to do the consensus individuating and a spirituating states of consciousness to recognize they're just not aware yet. But this is opportunity to adjust your languaging. Can you speak truth to power in a simple way that others can hear and understand? That's going to be your quest with these aspects. So again, do not neglect semi-squares and sesqui squares. A few more highlights for you. The Saturn retrograde, you can see right here we have in the space of a month 3 planets turning retrograde. We'll go into summer with another Mercury retrograde, but this one's going to be Earth to fire. But here's the dates that Mercury's in Leo, which will be about a 2-month time period. And here's that sesqui square that I talked about, right on the heels of the Saturn squares that we mentioned. And you may be starting to pick up on the fact that if we have a square and a half to Pluto and a square to Saturn, Saturn and Pluto are semi-squares. Stay tuned. I'll show you that in a minute. Here's when Pluto retrogrades back for 2.5 months into Capricorn, in time for one more USA election. Hold on, I got those charts coming up. Before we do that, though, on the subject of Jupiter, I just want to take a moment and show you the chart for the USA Supreme Court. It was created with the Judicial Act of 1789 on September 24th in New York, New York. At that time period, Congress met in New York. George Washington was president in New York. There was no Washington, D.C. yet. We have no time. If somebody ever comes up with anything, I'd be so curious to have information passed on to me. So therefore, I use the 0 degree Aries. Guess what's happening to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2024? They're going to have a Saturn return, transiting Saturn on their natal Saturn. Not only that, solar arc Mars on the spring equinox is going to conjunct the natal Saturn on the Supreme Court chart. So I think they're going to have a pretty fairly active year. This natal chart has a Jupiter opposition to Pluto. Judicial beliefs split amongst the soul of our country, that include, exclude that we talked about. Back in the day, this was between the elites and the commoners, the whites and the blacks. We didn't have a 14th Amendment yet, nor did we have the Civil War yet. Urban versus rural. Both the Jupiter and Pluto are square the nose of the moon. Power struggles around the country's beliefs, resources, human rights. There is a grand water trine for Saturn with Mars and the North Node in Scorpio. I looked at that and I thought, don't tell me these Supreme Court justices are not emotional beings. Their whole thing is to try and be as intellectual as possible. But if there's one thing we know in evolutionary astrology, spirit and flesh are two sides of the same coin. You cannot separate the senses out of the head. Sagittarius moon, Libra sun. Oh, could this be where we have this desire for a blind and fair Lady Justice that we see symbolized in all of our legality? But we also have the Mercury, Neptune, Mars, Eris T-square. So here's Mercury, Neptune. There's all that ideology with the Supreme Court. Some of it fair, maybe some of it not. And it's in a T-square with Mars making an opposition to Eris. And this hits the USA chart again, the include versus exclude. Here's the biwheel on the Munchausen chart. And here's what kind of stuck out to me in a couple of different areas. You know, this nodal axis square with Jupiter, Pluto, right on the USA public moon. That split and difference of opinion that takes place, and even how the Supreme Court itself ebbs and flows between liberal and conservatives. The original Supreme Court Act, the Judicial Act of 1789, created 6 Supreme Court justices, and they had to do a traveling circuit You didn't travel to them, they traveled around what was the country back then. And the Supreme Court justices number has ebbed and flowed over the years. As you can see, it started out as 6, now it's 9. It went to an odd number to break ties. I don't remember when that was. But here's that ebb and flow that we see again. And here's the, I had said the Mars Eris T-square with Mercury Neptune that comes right in there with the US Mercury Pluto opposition, even drags into the Chiron in the USA chart. That's why I think the 2024 is going to continue to be an interesting year with the Supreme Court for women. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to cut back on a female's right to use the abortion pill and take away the right to use it through the mail. I wouldn't be surprised again to see all of our racial issues, all of our immigration issues expanded. You know, in the Senate, the Democrats and the Republicans have come together on a compromise for immigration reform at the border. But the House Republicans will never go for it because they want it as a campaign issue to in politics. And so there's that Cancer Capricorn can start to fall into the whole racial issue. Your mutable signs fall into the immigration issues. And here's that Saturn return for the US Supreme Court chart opposing Neptune. And it's having that Moon in Sag opposing Mars, creating a wide T-square in the USA chart. Again, all of this together just shows this split we have in the country. And it'll be interesting to watch the Supreme Court and its ideology. Are they going to be the originalist, interpreting the Constitution literally, or are they going to wrap themselves in, or what do they call it in the circus when you bend your body and put yourself in those extreme poses to just try and justify coming up with the ends justifies the means, which is probably what we're going to see in 1 or 2 Donald Trump cases. I don't think our US Supreme Court has the courage. I think Donald Trump committed insurrection on January 6th, but I don't think our Supreme Court has the courage to take him off the ballot because of the chaos that it would create in this country. So they're going to finagle a way to decide for all of us. You know, isn't this interesting? Abortion issues needs to be a states' right issue, but when it comes to a presidential candidate, well, then it's got to be a federal issue. Stay tuned, watching all this stuff in the news as time goes by. I invite you to just kind of study this chart every time the Supreme Court comes out with another decision. And of course, it starts October 1st every year, and it finishes its year on June 30th. And so it's the middle of the year that we start to see all those decisions come through. Here's those Saturn semi-squares to Pluto that are going to be taking place this year. And again, it's one more of those aspects that does not show up in your astrology calendars. This is the 45-degree crescent phase from their conjunction back in early 2020 at 23 degrees Capricorn. So as they move through that crescent phase together, which they'll be in for a few years, its intent is to gestate all of the new beginnings we have had since their conjunction. And it can create frustration, especially between these two planets, because crescent phase is yin energy. It's energy turning inward. And Saturn and Pluto like having control. They like being in charge. And it is extremely uncomfortable for Saturn in Pisces because no matter how much it tries to control, it just slips through its hand. And so these aspects can have our consensus world trying to hold on to that control, especially as Pluto in Aquarius brings whatever shakeups it's going to surprise us with. And so autocratic countries can do power grabs, may or may not be successful. Democratic masses may rise up. There's my word. For those of you who missed the beginning, I didn't know how to spell the word autonomous. There it is. So the masses may start to maybe rise up, especially if they feel inspired, and especially when Saturn moves into Aries in this crescent phase that's going to come along. Now, winding down, I have a few slides on Saturn and Neptune. They're not making any aspects. Yes, Media Monk, I heard you. Maybe
Oh,
you
I
were
was
muting
just
yourself.
reacting to your autonomous. It sounds like a dinosaur you had. Is that a dinosaur from the Paleolithic age or something?
Maybe.
That was interesting choice of spelling. But thank you. I just had to throw that comment in.
That's okay. Thank you. Oh, and so Saturn is balsamic phase to Neptune. I put these in last year, so I still think they're important for us, even though there's no specific aspects. We have 3 years where Saturn is going to turn stationary retrograde in timing with Neptune turning stationary retrograde. Then they're going to rebirth their cycle at 1 degree Aries. And in 26, 27, they're going to turn stationary direct together in Aries. And so we're really going through a release of old beliefs, old realities that just no longer make sense for us. It's also part of why everybody was saying, bah humbug in 2023. I don't like the way the economy is going. I don't like the way the world's going, et cetera, et cetera. It's these two balsamic and having to release form in Pisces. And then when they hit that Aries, conjunction in February of 26, they're going to be part of this everything exploding and taking off in our world, rebirthing our beliefs, really wanting to break free from any suppressive stuff that's going on. Because again, while there's going to be negatives to AI, there's also going to be positives to AI. By the way, in that Great Ingress decade that I mentioned, I do go into more detail of the negatives and positives of the AI world throughout Pluto, Aquarius, Uranus, Gemini. But just for you to see this, retrogrades in 23, 24, 25, they go into Aries, they have their conjunctions, they dip back and forth from Aries to Pisces together, I think. But then here they are in, well, no, they dip back and forth right here. There's the Aries retrogrades back to Pisces, Aries, the conjunction again. And then here's the stationary directs that they do together. So I'm just repeating these so that you can bring them into your consciousness this year and recognize that these two aren't off by the wayside with nothing going on. And so, as you can see from screens from last year, collective environmental depressions as reality doesn't support our ideals, dreams, and the ability to provide for ourselves and other. Breakdowns of social structures, disease and addiction issues, destruction of the environment and species. And so mass is increasingly recognizing the need to change our relationship with the material world. Renewable energies coming through somehow, some way. They're exploding up here where we live, at least the the wind farms are and other various things that are going on. These two are part of the globalization that's going on the planet. And so the potential for major religious and spiritual changes in the world and consensus consciousness is going to resist this. They're going to continue to war against, what is it now called? DEI, diversity something, inclusiveness something. It's an acronym for being giving, sharing, and including. And so that Saturnian world is just coming unglued through Saturn in Pisces, and they're becoming more and more detached from reality. They're living in their own little Neptunian spin. And this will continue through these two planets waning each other. Stay tuned in 26 when they conjunct in Aries and spend 2 years and 14 years, respectively, Saturn, Neptune in Aries. Who knows where we're going to, go with all of this. But I also have hope. I had said Pluto and Aquarius can bring a renaissance in New Age thought. So can Saturn, Neptune. And I think when they go into Aries, that it's possible, for various parts of the world to have consensus consciousness go, wait a minute, I want to explore this. I want to look at this. Neptune's just 2 years away, a year away from starting a brand new 165-year cycle of spiritual rebirthing. And so there is hope, even through all of this chaos that is shaking everything up for us. Here's more of these highlights for you. Planets changing directions in the Jupiter-Saturn aspects per chronological order. Here's when Pluto goes back into Aquarius again. And then here's the last of the Mercury retrograde cycles in a fire sign, and the 2 months that it's there in Sagittarius for us. And so as we head into fall, here comes the South Node eclipse season, which with a South Node in Libra is relationship reviews individually and collectively. Learning to get along or re-imprinting old hurtful relating patterns. So here again, we start with a lunar eclipse and followed by a solar. And this lunar eclipse has a grand Earth trine, so Earth events, or could there possibly be various resource rewards going on? We have a mutable T-square taking place between Sun Virgo, Moon Pisces, conjunct Neptune. It even pulls in Saturn. They're in a T-square with Jupiter in Gemini, slowing down, ready to go. Stationary retrograde, October 9th. And so here's all that ideological splits and information that's going to be heating up this fall with the US presidential election. Remember I said when we get to the latter part of the year, Mars will have moved from Capricorn to Cancer, and it's going to be in it, squaring the nodes of the moon. Anger, violence, Mars and Cancer squares its natural rulership to Aries. Emotional outbursts and frustrations can be possible. And so this solar eclipse happens to land on the USA Mars Neptune square. And so again, triggering the ideological splits that we have, our beliefs, bringing up the whole communication issues with Gemini, stationary retrograde, excuse me, Jupiter in Gemini, stationary retrograde taking place. So what's going to break loose in the news media in regards to communications, in regards to misinformation? If Donald Trump is still running for president, stay tuned, a few more slides. What is he going to be saying? How far off the wheels will he be at this point? And then this Mars square the nodes, it is going to be, here's the nodal axis, and here is Mars. It's going to be on the USA, Jupiter, you can include Venus, Eris, opposition that we have going on here. So this too can lend itself perhaps to, a bit of violence. On a personal level, this is going to be a lunar eclipse where you want to be as gentle and loving to yourself as possible, where you really want to be walking your talk in regards to your beliefs and your ideals, where you want to be holding the circle as broadly as you can wherever you are. And it may be easier said than done. And then we'll go into the South Node solar eclipse. And as you can see here, we're going to have that solar eclipse at about 10 degrees Libra, which is going to be right on that South Node with Mercury right in there as well. And so divide and conquer, stand together. We're going to be a month out from the US presidential campaign. So here can be the good old October surprise that everybody talks about in the USA. It can also bring about the Libra extremism. We understand in evolutionary astrology, Libra is not always balanced. It can sometimes bring across extremes. And so the solar eclipse is going to square the USA Cancer stellium. Are we going to be reaching for some of that Libra objectivity? Or are we going to be full of emotional entrenchment? You, me, us, them. I think most of us would like to live in peace and calm. Can we just live life? And of course, we have a grand water trine with Venus, Saturn, and Mars here. Here again, I think it brings up all of the gender issues. This is why I think the abortion issue in the states that it's active is going to be very, very active, with women saying, my body, my choice, however I need to. Now, Pluto will have retrograded back into Capricorn, and it will be during the US presidential election. So let's take a brief look at that. And here, to me, is probably the most important slide that I am presenting tonight. For Biden against Trump. Between 2016, when Trump first was elected, and 2024, the USA is creating a net gain of 52 million younger voters against older people. During that time period, during those 8 years, we will produce 32 million eligible new voters. If you want to be politically active, here is where you put your energy. During that 8-year time period, 20 million older voters have passed on, died off. Now, most of these new voters in this 8-year time period that turned 18, they're Gen Z voters, they're Pluto and Sagittarius. And they will literally represent 20% of eligible voters in 24. They vote issue politics over party, although they will hold their nose and vote mostly Democratic. There's your hope for Biden against Trump. For Trump against Biden, presidential election, unfortunately, through the Electoral College, comes down to only 11 states that are competitive. Here are the 11 states. They represent 20% of our population. If you live in one of those 11 states, I would encourage you to be as politically active in getting out the vote as you possibly can. Basically, Republicans have the majority in 24 states with 218 electoral votes. Democrats have 17 states in DC with 211 electoral votes. Just in case you're not familiar with what the Electoral College is, we don't have a direct popular vote in the US. Each state has its popular vote, and most of the states, I think there's 2 exceptions, most of the states then say whoever wins the popular majority vote, all of that state's electoral votes go towards president. And those electoral votes are based upon congressional representation for each state. It totals 538. There's 100 senators, there's 435 representatives, and I think 3 votes go to the District of Columbia or something like that, or maybe Guam or somewhere else. So every 10 years when we take the census, those seats are reapportioned according to population. Never changes with each state having 2 senators, which is outdated, but the House of Representatives moves back and forth. Twice in person who won the presidency by the Electoral College lost the popular vote. Al Gore lost to Bush and Hillary Clinton lost to Trump. Now, here's the real interesting thing that you can go through. It takes 700,000 Californians to have 1 electoral vote. It takes 194 Wyomingites to have an electoral vote. Every single person's vote in Wyoming is worth 362% of each vote in California. That is what creates the chaos in our presidential elections. Now, there are some states that are starting to pass state laws that are saying their popular vote has to be apportioned with the Electoral College votes in their state. There's various things. To change this would take a change to the Constitution, which would mean that Congress would have to pass something, the president would have to sign it, and 3/4 of the states would have to ratify it. The other way would be to have a constitutional convention, which would be like opening Pandora's box. You can go research that more on your own if you want. Not fair. And so what it's created is a situation where Democrats have to overwin to win the Electoral College. They have to overwin the majority vote by, they're saying about 4 or 5%. They can't just go 50% plus 1 vote. They're having to go like 55% of the popular vote to have enough of the Electoral College to win. Stay tuned as we go through Pluto and Aquarius. The last time we went through Pluto and Aquarius, remember the Bill of Rights? That was the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. We may see in the next 20 years amendments to the Constitution, but that's a little bit longer forecasting. I like to do election polls for when the polls open. I use 7 a.m. in Washington, D.C. These are the actual charts now. I also use when the polls close. That's not when they stop voting. And obviously it's not 7 p.m. in Hawaii, but it gives me a start date, stop date for Washington. And so polls opening, we have this T-square between Jupiter, retrograde Gemini, Venus, Moon, and Neptune. By the time the polls close, the moon has moved into Capricorn and it is squaring the nodes of the moon, while Venus, Jupiter, Neptune remain in their T-square. When I first drew up this chart, I was like, oosh, ooh, Donald Trump and all his Gemini Sag planets. And then I went, wait a minute. Here is November 3rd, 2020 against Trump and Biden. When the polls closed, we had a similar thing with changes, but we had that Gemini rising with Moon and North Node in Gemini, and Donald Trump lost. And I went, oh, okay, I'll take a deep breath. By the way, if you haven't figured out my filter, I am not a fan of Donald Trump, and I make no excuses for it. And so, as we look at presidential candidates, I participated in an EA Zoom discussion panel, and the group of us that did that, we're going to meet a couple of times again on EA Zoom as the election gets closer and as there's anything that breaks in the news. There are some astrologers who don't think either Biden or Trump will be on the election ballot in November. I'm of the opinion that probably it's going to be a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I just tend to think that's the case. I'll show you my one caveat here. But first of all, in looking at Donald Trump's chart and the polls closing, he's going to have the Jupiter and Gemini retrograde cycle going over his Neptune, going over his Uranus and North Node 3 times. He's going to have it opposing his South Node and Moon 3 times. To me, this is all his legal battles. This is all the chaos that is going to go on. Out of 91 felony counts, I really do think that there are going to be juries that are going to find him guilty. The question's going to be Jupiter and Gemini. How much delay can he do in his 4 major lawsuits, not to mention all the other minor lawsuits that are going on? It's possible he will be acquitted on one of them. I don't think he's going to be acquitted in regards to taking classified materials and refusing to return them, the Georgia case. We'll see if that takes place before the election. The insurrection case, I think it's pretty factual. But the way this country's split, who knows if we're going to have one secret Trump fan that makes it onto the jury. Stay tuned. We shall find out. Probably these are solar arcs and major progressions. And right before the election, he's going to have solar arc Saturn hanging out here in Libra, square his Mercury. And so that's not going to be so decent for him. It's still conjunct the South Node, that's split of people who support him or who don't. He's got Saturn squaring his Uranus 3 times. He's got Uranus squaring his Mars 3 times. And then that moon when the polls close and that squaring of the nodes that it's doing, it's right smack dab here on his Neptune. So half the country that thinks he's literally the Messiah and half the country who go, what the fluff are people thinking? I just don't know if the popular vote will get him elected. I have hope that he's not going to make it. I have hope that the closer we get to the election, the more extreme Jupiter in Gemini he goes, the more people go, I don't want 4 more years of him. I have my fingers crossed. Again, you live in those states where it makes a difference, please be active. Joe Biden, probably the biggest thing that's happening in his chart. I mean, I think these two candidates have to literally come to their demise to not be on the ballot. The biggest thing with Joe Biden is that while transiting Pluto is back into Capricorn, it's squaring his moon, and it's closer to squaring its moon than it was in 2020. Now, it also trines his Neptune. That's kind of in his favor. I can't say that there are those who are going to be as ideologically for Biden as much as they are ideologically against Donald Trump. Here's the South Node again. It's not as tight of a conjunction to Biden's Neptune as it is to Donald Trump's. It does come in with the moon and make a T-square to this Eris-Neptune opposition that he has. But one of the other things that I think has a tendency to come through, I wonder if this two things, this moon and Neptune, or excuse me, moon and Capricorn isn't just going to say, I've got to be practical here. I don't think the country will survive 4 more years of Donald Trump. I don't think democracy will survive 4 more years of Donald Trump. Therefore, I hold my nose and vote for the old guy. But here's something that's going to happen. Solar arc Pluto is going to move into Scorpio April 27th in Biden's chart. Here it is up here, and it's going to move into Scorpio, and I think it might help him find a little authority, find a little guts, find a little, I'm going to go for Donald Trump's jugular because this is what's at stake, Scorpio. It will be opposing his moon, although it won't be exact until April of 25, a year later. Stay tuned, we'll see. Again, this isn't in depth. You can follow myself and others on EA Zoom as time goes by if you want. I have been paying attention to this, and I just, again, when I read those Celinda Lake statistics in WAPO, the Washington Post, that there's going to be a difference of, 50 plus million voters from older to younger between 2016, 2024. And as the election gets closer, I think these issue-based young voters are going to say, we will have no future with Donald Trump. Stay tuned, time will tell. Now, if I think of any exceptions to the rule, I decided I was going to look at Nikki Haley's chart. There's no time that is brought out for it, but I was kind of a little fascinated, really, when I looked at all of the aspects she has going on election day when the polls close. And again, I like the polls closing over polls opening election day because when that moon changes signs, it makes a difference. And that moon in Capricorn is lending to the practicality. And you can also find changes sometimes with Venus and Mercury. And of course, we have a different ascendant by then. But here's the biggie. On election day, Pluto is 2947 Capricorn, and her sun at noon on her birthday, January 20th, 72, is 2944. I went, whoa, that's pretty darn close. Maybe there's something that happens with Trump, because if it's Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, Nikki Haley's going to win. But look at all the conjunctions in her chart. They are just all over the place. And again, this is the polls closing. So, who knows? 11 months is a long time off to predict, and I don't like that word, but I just bring this up for your consideration. And so, here is the third and final Pluto ingress chart into Aquarius, which will come after the election. It'll be November 19th. Now, this is what traditional astrologers call a splay or a splash. All the planets are all over the place. However, right before the USA election, Mars makes a opposition to Pluto, November 3rd, 2946, Cancer Capricorn, right on Nikki Haley's sun. And then we also have a Sun Uranus opposition, which will be November 16th. You see it right here in Scorpio, Uranus retrograde Taurus. And then we have Jupiter's opposition and Jupiter's retrograde making an opposition to Mercury on the 18th at 18 Sag Gemini. So why the chart is again a splay, I think it's called, it's got three major oppositions in it saying, maybe by the third time Pluto goes into Aquarius, we're really going to be kicking things off here. And again, half the country is going to be celebrating and one half will be depressed. And I really, 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 really hope I do not have to pull out my pink pussy hat, which I saved. Now, all of that stuff has a tendency to also come into this chart as well. The Mars-Pluto opposition pulls into our collective Leo Aquarius nodal axis, the haves and the have-nots, the elites and the, commoners. We have that Sun-Uranus opposition squaring the moon. So here is the public. Again, as I said, half of the public's going to be traumatized because their candidate lost. And then we also have Jupiter, Neptune. So here is Jupiter on the natal Mars, Neptune, and here is the Neptune opposition still within orb of everything as well. So by the time we get past the election and Pluto goes back into Aquarius, we'll see what's going on with this country. If by some chance Donald Trump has won, there is a paper going around called Project 2025, where they are really extreme conservatives are planning to just gut the federal government so that they can pretty much take control once and for all. If that's what's taking place, reflective of these charts, it's going to be a wild ride. And if by some chance we have a Democratic president again, all of those conservative circles who lost are just going to be in their own way shell-shocked, but in their own way just deciding, okay, we're going to go back to the drawing board, we're going to go back to states' rights, and we're going to go back to the local elections, and we're really going to be going grassroots from there. Either way, this just portends for the USA to be at the end of the year and, having a little shock and awe and chaos going on. Stay tuned. Maybe Pluto and Aquarius can be a hope for an egalitarian future. It's a little tough to see because of the split in this country and the fact that I don't think it's going to be healing overnight. Stay tuned, everybody. And so here's the rest of your highlights with planets moving forward. We have a Mars retrograde that we're going to finish out the year with. And I went into 25, finishing up retrograde cycles and finishing up Saturn and Jupiter, making the last of their aspects to the outer planets. And so just briefly for you, here's Mars retrograde in Leo Cancer at the end of the year, retrograde December 6th, 6 Leo, direct February 23rd, 17 Cancer. We haven't had a split sign Mars retrograde for a while. When Mars is retrograde in a single sign once every 2 years, it's 7 months. When Mars splits a retrograde between two signs, it's usually about 9 months. This is an extremely active Mars retrograde. It's going to make aspects to Saturn, Chiron, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune. It'll make a second aspect to Saturn. So this Mars retrograde has 6 aspects to Saturn. And then, of course, it also aspects Pluto, and then it'll axis. As I said before, half the country will be celebrating, half will be depressed. Stay tuned. We will see how this retrograding Cancer Capricorn deals with the US, all of our Cancer planets, and all of our Capricorn Aquarius planets. It's going to go retrograde on the USA North Node. And through this retrograde cycle, it is going to go over the USA Mercury 3 times. It'll oppose the USA Pluto 3 times. So one more situation where it's not going to be necessarily a black and white, this is definitive USA election again. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, that's it for my slides. And so I will work with Jupiter and Gemini and Mars retrograde as we go out throughout the year, in addition to the Mercury retrograde cycles. Comments, questions from anybody?
Nope, seem to be, well, we had one student ask about any insights on Putin, but that's probably research for another time.
Yeah, I did not look at Putin in regards to my charts, but hold on, because I just happen to have his chart pretty handy here. So let me just go through a couple of little things right here and see if I can pull it out real fast. Well, I thought I had it here. I usually have it in my forecasting pile, and I'm wondering if it ended up in a new pile. I may not be able to address that. I'm not running across his chart right away. Here's what I'll do. If you listen to our new moon, full moon podcasts, I will go find his chart because I know it. I have it in one of these little piles. And once I find which pile it's in, then I'll address it on our new moon, full moon podcast for you. So apologies, I didn't look at his chart this time around. I also didn't look at Netanyahu's either. I just kind of focused on the USA, so thank you for that. But having all this fresh, maybe I'll make a couple comments on both of them on the New Moon podcast for whoever asked that question.
Yeah, let's do that. Was there a question on Nikki Haley's birth time, Kim?
I did not want to cross an established birth time on her.
7:27 a.m. from one of the associates, Victoria.
Okay, so whoever is coming out with 7:27 a.m. on Nikki Haley, if you could in the chat pane tell me where your source is coming from. All right. I have a tendency to use Astrodites, which is Lois Rodden's old work where she, rates them A, B, C, D in regards to how valid the birth times are. And so if it's not a valid birth time, I don't like to speculate. However, even if that is a correct time for Nikki Haley and we get an ascendant, descendant, she's still going to have all of those conjunctions in her chart that we looked at.
Gotcha. We'll just kind of table that for now.
Any other questions?
Well, you're all clear.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to postpone this a week due to being under the weather. I wish you all safe and happy through the storms we're having now and all the way through the new year. And please be looking for the PDFs of all these PowerPoint slides so you can have them for your referral in 2024. All the best throughout the year, everyone. Thank you very much.